Welcome to episode 17 of the Adventuring for Mere Mortals podcast. I'm Kyle, back in the studio after being away for a month, and joined by co-host Trevor. And this month, we sit down with Joseph, Mr. Overhill Gonzalez, and we're going to talk a little bit about hiking and designing itineraries. Trev, take it away.
Our guest this month is Joseph, Mr. Overhill Gonzalez. He comes highly recommended by a previous guest, Matt Pretzel Mason from episode 14. Go back and listen to that if you haven't already. Yeah, Joseph, he's a triple crowner. So he's done all the big, long trails in the U.S., as well as Arizona Trail, High Sierra Trail, Tahoe Rim Trail, Trans-Catalina Island Trail, and the Wonderland Trail. So a big hiking resume. And he's also, on top of doing these trails for himself, he's been a hiking and backpacking guide in all those big national parks that are out west. So we got Zion, Bryce, Death Valley, Grand Canyon, Yosemite, Sequoia. So all the big ones that everybody hears about and wants to go to, the crowded ones. And then after that, he went into selling, supporting, and designing itineraries for like adventure style trips for people. So I think this is going to be a great episode. Yeah, Joseph, just tell us a little bit more about yourself. That's just my like generic resume reading, but yeah, go for it, man.
Happily, and great introduction there, Trev. My name is Joseph Gonzalez. You can call me Joe. If we're on trail, Mr. Overhill, however you want to navigate it, you can drop the Mr. too. Even I feel like it's kind of pretentious sometimes. Usually if I'm hiking with folks for a long enough period of time, they just end up calling me Joe anyway. But from the San Francisco Bay Area, I feel really privileged to have grown up there with a great support structure of friends and family who are always encouraging me to get outside, like so many others. Around 2019, early 2019, I moved to the Pacific Northwest to Washington. I live in the Puget Sound area, a really bougie community called Bellevue that's just across the river, right across Lake Washington from Seattle. So that's where I reside. I've, basically made a career in outdoor recreation, trying to shift that a little bit more towards conservation these days. But love hiking, love getting outside. And the only thing I love more than that is sharing it with other people, trying to empower them to get outside themselves and make the world a better place.
Yeah, that's what we're all about, man. All right. So that was a great intro. And I haven't talked to Kyle like in an audio type form in like 2 months now. Like we text every once in a while.
Yeah.
So Kyle, what have you been up to, man?
Lots of work. But I've also been getting out and having fun. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I don't want to talk about work.
Nice.
But work did take me to Gettysburg. So
Ooh.
Went and did some stuff on the battlefield. Let's see here. Been doing a lot of little trails in north central Pennsylvania, playing with chainsaws a bit, helping folks out. Taught a weekend-long orientation to cave rescue. I've traveled a lot within probably 100-mile radius of where I live. It's been nuts. What about you, Trev?
Nothing that exciting. It's finally like real spring here, so I've been doing a lot of very adult kind of boring things, landscaping stuff, putting in trees in my yard, doing gardening stuff now that it's finally warm enough all my plants don't die. But as far as like adventure stuff, I'm trying to get more miles in on my bike, so I'm prepared for Ragbri. That's going
start biking.
Okay. I need to get more in. But a cool thing I did last week. So my son had oral surgery. They had to remove a molar. Not that big a deal, but he was home for a couple days. And then the last day, he's like almost 4, and he was just bouncing off the walls. He wanted to go do something. So I'm like, okay. So I found a forest preserve that was like 30 minutes away. What's it called? Lake of the Woods Forest Preserve. It's in Champaign County near Champaign-Urbana. But we went hiking around there, 2 little short hikes. But we saw a pair of deer, and he got very, very excited. So it was, I'd call it a win. It's a good time. But yeah, that's about it. Work keeps me busy, but outside of work, I'm spending a lot of time outside. It's just mostly at my house.
That's actually been kind of crazy with you traveling and everything like that.
Yeah.
It's weird to be out of touch for a while.
Yeah. If people don't know, I work 14 days on and 14 days off. And some of the 14 days I'm flying out to the middle of Gulf of Mexico and get on a boat. So I have internet and stuff, but it's kind of limited on what I can do. Like, I don't think the internet out there would be good enough that I could like podcast while I'm out there. Also, that would be weird doing that in the room in my quarters. But we haven't had to resort to that yet. But yeah, that's some background challenges that Kyle and I have with this, but that's all right. But yeah, Joe, what have you been up to, man?
Not a whole lot, not as much as you guys, I guess. Yeah, I guess on my end, it's you guys live in northern climates, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
PA, yeah, okay, all right. So as you know, finally spring is actually here. So I've been enjoying getting outside a little bit. Been doing some jogging. I've been doing some trail running with my partner at local trails, which is a lot of fun. We're looking forward to getting the kayak out pretty soon here. It's also morel season in the Northwest for burn morels and natural morels. So that's something that we're really looking forward to getting after. Hopefully, we were thinking about taking our cat hiking or camping. We take her hiking and foraging from time to time, but we haven't gone camping with her. So that's kind of a big step in our little micro family. Yeah. Otherwise, just lifting a lot of weights. I'm on trying a Whole30 plant-based diet, which has me feeling really gassed lately. But got to get ready for beach season, right? It only lasts like 6 weeks in the Northwest, so I can do what we can.
No, that's great, man. All right. Well, I think now that we're all acquainted, I think we can start getting into our topic and questions. I don't really know what I'm going to call this topic yet. You'll see it in the title of the episode. But a good place to start out is, Joe, how were you introduced to the outdoors? Like, normally somebody, either a family member or a friend, or like in the case of Pretzel, his family friends really got him out there. How did you get introduced to the outdoors?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that so many of our life choices, I mean, we like to take credit for them, but I feel like so much of it is almost predetermined by where we grew up and the people who we surround ourselves with when we're young. So in my case, I was really fortunate to grow up in the San Francisco Bay Area, the foothills, a little community called Livermore, which is about 45 minutes to an hour east of San Francisco proper. Northern California, it's super rich in recreation opportunities. My opa, that's my grandfather in German, he was a science teacher and a marine biologist in the Bay Area, so he was always talking my ear off about flora and fauna, whether I wanted him to or not. And then also so that side of the family has been really supportive for a long time. Alternatively, my dad and all of his two brothers, they're all like lifetime scouters. So they did scouts as a youth, and then my dad was really involved growing up. Yeah, so I did the whole scout thing. Like from 4 years old, I was a Tiger Cub to submitting my Eagle packet when I was turned 18, and then I've done some adult work with the scouts as well. So it's kind of been a lifelong adventure for me, if you will.
Kyle's an Eagle Scout too. He gets very excited.
Nice.
Although I didn't do Tiger Scouts or Tiger Cubs. I actually started with Wolf.
Yeah, Weeblos is a good one. I think when you're like 8, 9, 10 years old, really you're kind of starting to get a little bit more autonomy, right? And you besides you can do more adventure stuff there. You're typically rock climbing, shooting, archery, etc. at that age. Yeah. By the way, Trevor, I like how you said he is an Eagle Scout. Now he was an Eagle Scout, because any Eagle Scout will tell you
he's still the Eagle Scout of our
Eagle
adventure
Scout for life. Yeah,
he is prepared. Exactly. He's the one that's
Doug
always
is giving me a
prepared.
run.
All right, so I guess we'll kind of move into like more of your adventure travel background, but I guess that's a good place to really start this off. So how do you define adventure travel? I know that's kind of a big thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of nebulous, if you will. I think that I go back and forth with using it, because the term adventure travel, like you said, what does that mean? Sometimes it can sound kind of pretentious, to be honest. I think that the way I quantify adventure travel in my brain is like, if you need additional support, skills, resources, or experience that you don't already have in order to complete that endeavor. So like theoretically, I could go to New York City and like figure it out and go to Central Park and go to the Natural History Museum and the Empire State Building, right? And that's all fairly intuitive because I'm from the US and all these other reasons. But if I wanted to go rock climbing at Banff National Park in Canada, well, I don't have technical rock climbing experience. I don't know how to trad climb, right? That's something where I need to hire a professional to give me a hand. And really, that's just my own personal perspective. Some folks might not be able to do the New York reference that I just mentioned. They might need somebody to help them with that, right? So if you don't like the term adventure travel, you can also use the term active travel. Typically, you're out on your feet, a level 1 trip, so to speak, if you're going to categorize it, could be like going on a safari. So you just need to be fit enough to get in and out of a Land Rover, which for some folks, that's a lot of adventure, or, alternatively, I think what most folks are likely thinking of when they hear adventure travel is like, oh, I want to go to Everest Base Camp. Like, how do I hook up with some Sherpas? Can you tell me what vaccinations I need for Nepal, etc.?
Oh, okay. I got you. That's cool. Yeah. I have my selfish questions that I'll ask about planning trips later because I'm a big fan of planning trips, but
we could do that offline, Trev.
I guess we could do that
amount of time.
Yeah, I want to pick your brain about how to effectively plan trips because I end up planning trips like how I would want to do a trip, which may not be what everybody in the group wants, but that's my own thing. But excuse me. So in this adventure travel thing, like you've done well, I guess we'll go with where you started with. You started out being like the guide. So you did all these guiding in different national parks and stuff. So what was your favorite? Like, I like picking that out.
Yeah, it's a good question. And once again, I feel totally spoiled and privileged. And I know you guys are probably gonna kill me for this, but like any Westerner in the U.S. feels like very, very they're like super on their high horse about how great the West is and all of our vast national parks. A lot of people like to trash talk the Appalachian Mountains. Nice. Yeah, right. So for me, I mean, I feel really biased. I mean, I've gotten to work, I think Zion's great. Grand Canyon National Park is obviously great. For my money, I'm fairly certain that if there is a center of the universe, it's probably Yosemite Valley. Yosemite in general, that's like a lot of Californians or just people in general feel like they have a really strong spiritual connection to the park. Growing up in Northern California, having family who had done research and vacation in the park so often, I feel really close to that area. As soon as I had the opportunity in my guiding career to work there and live there for a couple summers, I leaped at it. That was my first kind of option, my priority. So that's definitely it. I love Yosemite. I love the Sierra in general. Kings Canyon and Sequoia National Park are also really great.
Yeah, like there's a reason Yosemite's popular. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's probably been a decade since I've been there. I need to go back, but it's great. I do really like Yosemite.
Nice. Hype is real, for sure. Those Y parks, Yellowstone, Yosemite, can't go wrong.
For sure.
So you mentioned being a guide. Do you have to have any special credentials or anything with that? Any training? Anything? Is it something that has someone that has a lot of experience could get into?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it is so relative to what kind of guiding you're doing and what the needs are of that specific position. I think that when I first got introduced to adventure travel more formally, like in a professional sense, I was amazed at the lack of experience that not just like the hiring pool that I was in had, but a lot of the folks who were teaching us had. Really, you don't have to know a ton of interpretive facts about the areas you're going. You don't even have to be that experienced of an outdoors person in terms of hiking, backpacking, climbing, camping, whatever. What you really need are soft social skills and a willingness to learn and a tolerance for being uncomfortable. Knowing how to socially engineer, navigate tough conversations, especially a lot of clients on a lot of trips. Once again, depends on your outfitter and the kind of market for that trip. But a lot of the folks who are joining are type A personalities with a ton of money. They belong to a very specific demographic, bracket, and they can be kind of hard to handle. So you need to be super confident. You need to be able to make stuff up on the fly. And you also have to play sort of logistical chess. You need to be like 2 or 3 steps ahead of the game thinking what could go wrong before it does go wrong. Those skills go way further than knowing how to pack a backpack or anything like that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you got to herd a lot more cats when you're running the trip.
Yeah, herding cats. Use that phrase all the time. I'm glad you know that one. Yeah. Also having just a thick skin, being tolerant, like, knowing yourself and your body when you're out there for, a couple of days, a couple of weeks, whatever on end. Especially you're dehydrated and like dirty and stuff. It's really easy to get snappy with your co-guide and with the guest, right? But ultimately your income depends on the tip, so you better watch it.
Yeah, I don't know if I would do well with that. So I've done like field work, and when I was down in the Yucatan doing field work, our one of the professors that was with us learned that I would get cranky at like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And she would just walk up with like a sleeve of cookies and go, "You should eat these." Like, "Thanks, Trish." Yep. And then I was happy like 20 minutes later because I guess my blood sugar dipped or whatever. And it's like, okay, then I was all good again. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have the social skills to be a paid trip leader. I'll do the ones that I plan for my friends for free.
I mean, it's not. I think it's not for everyone. I mean, I've heard anecdotal stokes about maybe like, John Muir not necessarily being like a great guide, or a lot of those fellas who were in the Sierra in the early days, relatively speaking, by like Western colonizer standards, talking like the 1800s, 1900s, 1700s, etc. A lot of those folks, even if they were super keen on the mountains, they weren't really great at socially interacting with folks, or even just like hiking at guest pace. Like a lot of guests don't hike as fast as you might on your own. But so. It's very relative. I think you'd rock it.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, that's really cool because, part of this podcast is getting people into the outdoors, and there might be people with a lot of those soft skills that have an interest in the outdoors that just look at it as, oh, if I want to be a guide or if I want to do this, have that naturalist background. But they're scared. They're like, oh, I've got to be a guide. I've got to know all these different knots and skills and everything. But that's really cool that, those are the more important skills in terms of whenever it comes to guiding. You have to have the technical background, but it sounds like that's something that you can learn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That can be taught. But just like knowing how to read a room, I'm amazed at how many folks don't possess that skill. That's a really big one. And sometimes you totally get cranky, right? I think that's kind of where leadership, knowing your own body and your co-guide, being experienced also matters. I remember one of my first trips, I had a senior guide. This guy, a lot of guides are typically like in their 20s and 30s. This guy was probably in his mid 50s, guru, had been around the company for a long time. And I remember him asking me, so what's your drug of choice? And I played it cool. I was lifting a cooler. I was like, yeah, we don't do drugs. Like I'm not allowed to do that. And he said, you be crazy to do this job sober. Like everyone has some sort of drug of choice on the back end just to cool off and keep themselves, level headed. So I guess cookies in that case, Trev, are a great drug.
Yeah. Sugar's good.
Sugar. Yep. Give me the Oreos.
Yeah, dude. Oreos are where it's at. So in your guiding, was a part of leading these trips teaching the people, the paying customer, like how to recreate responsibly? Because I'm sure people go out there and basically, to put it a crude way, just don't know how to behave themselves in the outdoors. You ever had to deal with anything like that?
I don't have too many horror stories on the like L&T ethics or like conservation front. Fortunately, I think that it's a layered thing, right? I mean, a lot of folks, like you guys have kind of alluded to, in your previous episodes, a lot of your content, folks don't always just like stumble into things, right? Hindsight's 2020, and going on a trip that costs you, $1,000, a couple $1,000, whatever, that's pretty premeditated. That takes a lot of time and effort to get going. So people already have an interest. Usually, they have some level of reverence for the places that we're visiting. I think that where it becomes tricky is there's some level of privilege or like entitlement with a lot of folks when they go outside, especially when they're paying to be there. Guiding is not as glamorous or as romantic as a lot of people make it out to be. A lot of people are just like really high on stoke and like pay me in high fives and pizza, brother. But that's not always how the world works. I think that for me, one of the things that I had a rub with during my adventure travel guiding years was I feel passionate about teaching these leave no trace ethics, or I feel passionate about teaching about geology or flora and fauna, all these different interpretive facts. But a lot of folks, to be honest, I mean, some are interested, mildly interested. A lot of eyes glaze over once you start that conversation. But a lot of folks are there to like, it's like another notch in their belt. They're basically like, oh, now I've been to Yosemite. I'll add that to Fiji and Machu Picchu and all these other great places that I've been. And that's kind of the soul sucking part of the job that not everybody likes to talk about.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm guilty enough for that. Over here on my wall, I have a picture. I have a map of all the national park sites, like all 423 of them now. And I try to go to all, and like, I'll be honest, some I appreciate more than others. Others, it's just like, okay, I'm going there just so I can say I went. But I try to make a point to, especially with national parks, like I'm a national parks geek about it, but they're very good at putting a story together, and every one of those park sites has something unique about it that was preserved for a reason. So I try to get in my right headspace every time I go to try to find what that specific thing is. So mindset's good.
I think that's a really thoughtful approach, and I really appreciate that you navigate it that way. I would ask you too, if you're visiting a national park, or if you're visiting anywhere, it could be like a state or a city or whatever. What constitutes a visit? Is it like driving through, or like having a layover? Do you need to have a meal there, or spend the night there? Like, what do you guys think?
I think for me, it'd be case based. It depends on how much there is to do. Like Yellowstone, Yosemite are huge. Like it's hard to appreciate those big spaces in a short amount of time. Like you can do your best. I mean, if you're just there's like, well, I have a day at the end of this business trip or whatever, I'm gonna go out there and see what I can and try to appreciate as much as you can. But for that, I would say it counts as a visit, but you should revisit.
That's a good answer.
Out.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, Kyle. What do you think?
So it's a great question, because I thought about that a lot. You know, flying around, you have layovers in cool places that you haven't actually been. Do you get it counted as a place that you've stayed? And I say no, you can't. In order for me to constitute something as a visit, or to say that I have been there, I make a conscious effort to interact with that location. So if I go in, like, we'll give the low threshold for a visit. And that actually, Trev, is with you whenever we were coming back from the Foothills Trail. And we stopped at, what was that little park?
Was it Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga?
No, it wasn't Lookout Mountain. It was actually outside of Atlanta. I'm blanking on the name, but we just went there and went into the visitor center.
It was the Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area.
Exactly. Yeah, and Trev ran in because he wanted to get his stamp.
I got my stamp.
And so he got his stamp, and then it was, okay, well, we're going to go do. Well, let's go drink beer at, this brew pub. And it was, no, actually, look, there's this trail, and we should go along it and actually, like, look at the river and whatever. And so we actually did a small loop to actually do more than just go in, get the stamp.
Yep.
And it was a place, I had lived in Atlanta previously, and it was a place that I hadn't visited, that I hadn't seen. I'd been up and down the Chattahoochee, at various locations, but it was a new experience. And so that's what I constitute as a visit. Good. You have to make a conscious effort to interact with that location.
Yeah, that definitely counts. Did you guys end up getting beers after?
Oh yeah,
for sure.
Oh, okay, so you double dip. You definitely, okay, for sure. That sounds good to me.
Yeah, so I guess the rules, you have to do more than the visitor center. You can't just roll up into the visitor center, look at the displays, and say, okay, that's good. So yeah, I like that. Actively interacting with the place you're in. I like that.
Yeah, that's a nice application for just trying to be a little bit mindful about your presence as a visitor in that area. It's a good call.
Mm-hmm.
Can you help Trev out in terms of planning trips? Like, what are the most important characteristics whenever it comes to planning trips? And I mean, we're all biased because Trev's our friend, and he is the one that takes point on logistics, and he does a great job. But like, as a professional guide, the tips and tricks of the trade.
I'll preface this on how I think about trips. So normally when I start planning them, I don't know who's going to become. So it's a trip I'm planning that I'm going to go on regardless. And then I kind of open up to all of our friends. If you all are available, like, come on. And then depending on who comes, I might do small changes from that, but not that.
He doesn't. He breaks them.
I've taken them on. We've done some intense hikes where my estimation of the amount of time it takes to take a trail is for my 6'4" tall body and speed. I hike fast.
You got that stride for sure. Yeah, not all of us are so lucky. That's such a tricky one to tackle, guys, because I mean, I think it's so relative to who's going, right? Ultimately, as like an overarching umbrella, if you will, the way that I approach it is you have to think of the vision. Like I like to break it down like you guys ever hear that phrase, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
right? So you
Yep.
break it down by your vision, and then your goals, and then your objectives, and then your strategies by which you achieve those objectives, right? So knowing who you're going with is a huge part of it. It's really tricky, I think, sometimes when you look at it from the personal perspective, because you have an implicit bias for like what you're able to do, especially physically or maybe
Mhm.
emotionally, with when it comes to like tolerance for discomfort, that a lot of folks might not necessarily be able to match, right? So that can make it really tricky when you don't know what kind of clientele are going with you. It's really important to have that conversation. Obviously, if you have a personal relationship with those people and you've like been on trail with them, and you know that goes really far. You don't always have that luxury, obviously, but that can be taken into an account. So for me, I like to break it down by just objective stuff. Like, look, how long does it take me to hike somewhere? I don't know. That's dependent on how fast you hike, but I can tell you how many miles it is and what the elevation changes and what the texture of the trail is, right? So those little
Mhm.
tidbits, play a pretty big factor. Also gauging interest and experience with regards to like how much gear they have, how much money they're willing to shell out. Are they a good communicator? Ultimately, there's an inherent risk with going outside, right? Even if you're styled and dialed, if you have somebody who might not be styled and dialed, or maybe just coincidentally suffers a bad accident out there, that
Mhm.
changes the entire group dynamic, right? So, like I said earlier, just kind of playing chess, got to be like 2 or 3 steps ahead and think of Murphy's law, especially if you have a friend or companion who's a little bit more prone to mishaps like that. It's a good thing to be aware of.
Yeah.
So whenever it comes to organizing a trip, do you interact with, your guests prior to, and when do you initiate that conversation with them?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kyle. So, I've worked for a couple different companies in the past in a couple different roles, right? So, if I were working in, say, like a more sales role, it, depending on what you're looking for, there could be scheduled trips, which is just another word for like canned trips, where there's like a
Hmm.
already designed itinerary, right? That's just off the shelf, like retail, where there's really easy talking points. I can go over it all with you. I can gauge you for your fitness and your interest level if this is the right trip for you. Ultimately, that's in all of our best interests. The rising tide lifts all boats in that scenario, because if I put you on a trip that you're not really, cut out for, or it's not right for you, not only are you going to have a bad time, the other guests are going to have a bad time, the guide's going to have a bad time, etc. So that can get ugly pretty quickly. So, knowing about the product, if you will, goes a long way. Alternatively, if I were designing a custom itinerary for you, in which case I would be talking to maybe the head of the family who's paying for it, or maybe like a high-end travel agent or something along those lines, then I need to know all the fine-tuned details about like how many folks are in your party. What level of accommodation are you going to need? What's your palate for adventure like, and how much cushion do you need, so to speak, right? And then I'll build it out from there. So it's a big build back process, and I think it's kind of an art, learning how to portray yourself as confident, like you know what you're talking about, while also getting the information out of them, convincing the customer that you have their best interest in mind, and then getting what you need out of them to build the itinerary that's perfect for their party.
As a customer, what would you recommend that they look for in a guide, outfitter, etc.? Some maybe red flags that I don't know, or signs of a quality guide that is genuinely invested in, the experience and betterment, of the individual on the trip.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because there's so many different organizations or outfitters that are putting on itineraries and trips. I think that for me, you're going to want to talk to, first of all, obviously look up reviews, right? We live in the digital age when there's like Yelp,
Yeah.
Google reviews, etc. You can look at all that sort of stuff. You want to make sure that it has a solid rating, but also if you can get a first person testimony from somebody, if you like, a lot of folks are recommended by friends, coworkers,
Mhm.
family to join certain outfitters. That testimony goes a long way. And then once you kind of narrow it down, I would first of all figure out, if do they offer an itinerary that's within your budget or within your interest level, activity level, to a place that you want to go to, because that matters a lot, obviously. And then, almost more importantly, I would say you need to roll up your sleeves and do a little bit of research. Find out, is this company ethical? What's
Mhm.
going on? How do they treat the local community? What is their take on leave no trace ethics? Right? Is this a place in the world that's responsible for me to visit right now? Am I doing right by these communities and the flora and fauna there by actually even showing up, or would it be more selfless of me to just stay at home? Right? Which is an
Mhm.
internal monologue. I mean, people feel really, really strongly about their entitlement to visit certain places. Other folks are a little bit more relaxed about it. But if you go there and the local people don't want you there, or if you're not doing them a service, then like, what are you doing? You're paying money to make the world a worse place, in my opinion. So
Okay.
that's a fine line sometimes, though.
Yeah. No, I asked that genuinely because I have honestly been kind of terrified to hire a guide or search an outfitter. You hear of um like REI host trips that are guided. Within the Tetons, there's guides, Exum guides up there, etc. And I don't know. I was always nervous because I didn't know what questions to ask in order to evaluate whether or not it was going to be an enjoyable experience that would match my skill level, etc.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that in the case of, and I can speak pretty honestly about this one. So I moved to Washington because I worked for REI. I was a guide for
Okay.
REI, and then I ended up moving to work for their corporate headquarters for their adventure travel team.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, I feel like REI, just using this example specifically, right? You can see them and like REI isn't really just an adventure travel company. Really, 90% of the company is retail based, right? Also,
Right.
they have some level of marketing or like ethos, if you will, that permeates the outdoor space of them being like, we're a responsible company, like we're looking out for your best interest. So, just from a PR standpoint, they're not going to do anything overly scandalous. I feel like that's a pretty safe
Right.
one to go
Yeah,
for.
that's fair.
Yeah. Also, a lot of parks only have a limited number of CUAs, commercial use agreements, that they can give out to certain outfitters you might know. So in this case, and I can't really endorse or like not endorse any specific company, but I would like to think that if they're like in the case of the Tetons or Glacier, CUAs are incredibly competitive, and so many of
Yeah.
these outfitters have legacy agreements with the park to even get in there. Chances are, if the park didn't like the way that they were operating, the concessionaire didn't like the way they were operating, they wouldn't be there, right? So I have some modicum of faith in that, just because history proves that they know what they're doing.
So you were talking about how you're like choosing a guide, like especially if you're going to some other country, like more one of the more developing countries. I know there's been like in probably the last 10 years or so, kind of the rise of what I've heard called like ecotourism. So you're going there instead of just on some cookie cutter trip where you're staying in 5-star hotels all the time and just going on your safaris, which those type of things still exist. But you can get more in depth. Like I know in like the Central America, you can go and stay on coffee farms now and chocolate farms. So you can kind of interact with the people that live and work there a little bit. And I think that kind of gets you more ingrained with like what life is really like in those places instead of into these cookie cutter trips. I just realized that wasn't a question. That was like more of a statement. But
No, it's true all the same.
what are your feelings on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's you said it well.
Nice
I think,
recovery, Trev.
yeah, well played. There's considerable overlap in terms of like ecotourism and active travel or adventure travel, right? Like a lot of the trips could fall into those two categories alike. I think that it's a fine line. In some ways, it's kind of a double-edged sword, and this is one of the main rubs I have with the industry that made me want to get out of it. Is so like on one hand, you are in theory, if you're going with a reputable outfitter, right, you're going to a place and you're supporting that community, you're funneling money into that community, right? And a lot of places and a lot of outfitters, you have to adhere by a very specific set of rules as mandated by that country's government for the betterment of that land. So like Kilimanjaro, like if you're climbing Kilimanjaro, all the porters, all the guides are Tanzanian. They have to go to school for it. It's an actual reputable career there, unlike it is in the United States, right? So that's great. On the other hand, I feel like in some places, well, there's an issue because I feel first world economic issues. Maybe it could be colonization issues. This is where the DEI perspective comes in a little bit more. Those communities are forced to wield tourism or ecotourism in this case for the betterment of their country because they were kind of like shoved into a corner. But historically, they have to leverage the land, the natural resources that they have in order to make money. I feel that's hyper prevalent in areas like Hawaii. You see it in Tanzania, you could see it in Peru, you could see it in Nepal. So that's something to be mindful of. I think that for me, a lot of those places, I'm willing to have a conversation about it or visit them depending on the outfitter. In other areas, example like the Havasupai Reservation, in Arizona near the Grand Canyon. That's one. That's one of the major reasons why I quit guiding is because we were operating trips there when it was still you were still allowed to do that as a commercial outfitter, and I just thought like, whoa, like are we really Like personally, are we really helping this community, or have they just been kind of, thrown into a corner by the United States government historically, and now this is one of the easiest ways for them to make money? So anyway, that's my opinion, obviously, but just be wary of that. I mean, you're a visitor in this place, right? So hold it as a sacred place.
No, I think that's a good point to make, and you have to think about is this what the people that are native to a region, is that what they really want to do? Would they, if they had their choice, would they want to just be catering to the rich white folk that want to come in and see these places, or like you said, backed into a corner because it's like it's their best option? So yeah, definitely be mindful.
Well, that's why my answer as to what does it mean to actually visit a place is that you have, a directed effort to interact with that location. And that comes from an experience where I was actually part of a team that worked on a sustainable tourism initiative, to a location, an exotic location that is going to attract, people that have deep pockets, that won't necessarily respect it. But what was cool was the natives actually recognized that, and that there was a need to have that reflected in their plan and how they developed, their tourism economy. And that it wasn't just, well, we're just going to cater to the highest bidder and have people come out. We actually need to protect and manage the landscape. So therefore, we're going to make it, tiered to where we cater to those folks that are privileged and have the deeper pockets, but also to the local community where this is something that they enjoy and they utilize, and they can go out and have their time there to interact with the landscape, nature, all that. But overall, we're not impacting the landscape or the environment negatively. So that was where I actually left and was like, holy crap, I need to kind of rethink about how I actually interact with places, and I need to be focused with intent, to get the most out of it, because otherwise you don't think about it. Think about how many people go on a trail, and as Pretzel said, the two worst enemies of a trail are people and water.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Erode that bad boy out, huh? Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I started honestly thinking about, like, do I really want to do this trail? Is this something that I want to do, rather than, oh, it's something here that I can just go off and do. And, there's no impacts because it's just me.
Yeah. I think that was really well said. I think it takes some level of thoughtful intent, right? And I think a lot of folks, as they, at whatever stage of their life, decide to get into the outdoors or travel or whatever it is, you're going to make some gaffes, some snafus, even if you're a veteran, experienced traveler, outdoors person, right? We're always learning. I think there's some level of grace that comes with that, which is always super appreciated. But yeah, I think that's the other side of the coin, is like, by going here and fostering this like sustainable level of tourism, are we cementing that this place is going to be preserved for decades to come? And if that's what it takes, that's better than losing it.
Yeah.
So there's no right or wrong answer, just perspectives.
Yeah, so this kind of leads me into another question. So we've kind of been talking about how pretty much everywhere, at least in the Western Hemisphere, there were people are going and recreating outside. At some point in the past, that was some native groups' land, and now it's been colonized to differing extents. But how can people like everyday people that want to go and recreate in these places, how can we do that responsibly and at the same time recognizing that we're a guest here, to put it that way, other than just trying to be mindful? Are there specific things we can do?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Trev. And I just want to preface this answer, I guess, by saying that I any advice or guidance I give, right, is nothing more than my anecdotal like life experience, right? I don't know if I'm qualified to speak about anything necessarily. You don't know what you don't know, and I know that I don't know anything. So with that out of the way, I think that, for one, being thoughtful and making an effort to learn a little bit about the history of the place that you're visiting is like a great first step, right? I mean, if there are people who grew up in that community, indigenous people, learning a little bit about their historical customs, learning, just trying to make an effort to learn a little bit about their language, maybe it's their religion, their social structure, things like that. That can go a long way in just kind of putting yourself in their shoes. I think that is a way of maybe practicing empathy and application while you're traveling, which is
Mhm.
something that not a lot of folks do, or not as much as we could as a collective society. I think there's small steps that you can take that barely scratch the surface, but I would like to think are nice for you to make an effort on, like land acknowledgments. Just acknowledging, like, especially if you're recreating in the United States, like basically anywhere you
Yeah.
go, anywhere, the land was stolen. And there's a very high likelihood that the original people that lived there, a vast majority of their population was killed off via genocide,
Mhm.
right? So
Yep.
these are things that are important to really just keep in mind. I find that even, and I know that you two can attest to this in your respective communities, think about how many names of areas there are that are indigenous names that you didn't realize, or how many names were chosen over the indigenous name. Like in my backyard, oh, the mountain's out. Look at Rainier is out. Rainier
Yeah.
is not the native name. You would call it
Mhm.
Tahoma, for example. Mount Hood, East, Mount St. Helens, Lewitt, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like just taking those steps, that helps a lot. Also, if that native community, that local community, if they don't necessarily, going back to like the tourism conversation, if they don't necessarily want you to visit, probably a good idea to listen to their wishes, right? I go
Yeah.
back and forth this
Yeah.
thing on the Hawaii front all the time because that's the most obvious application, but it's a hot topic and it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned like the native name versus the colonialized name of a lot of mountains or features. And I have noticed in the last probably 5 years, um, well, 5 years, and most recently since Deb Haaland took over as Secretary of the Interior, there's been a big push to rename a lot of, especially offensively named things out in the outdoors. So I'm glad to see that.
Yeah, there are a ton of those. And I feel like we're always unearthing more every day. I think that just even having a conversation, like as an individual, if you recreate in the outdoor space, or if you don't for that matter, if your place of work offers some sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion training, if there is an
Hmm.
ERG you can join, there are all sorts of organizations for all sorts of different demographics, however you identify, that are out there representing you in an outdoor space. Be an active part of that community. Get out, even if it's out of your comfort zone. Make an effort to connect with those people digitally, learn their story, attend a webinar, whatever it takes, meet with them. Because I feel like
Yeah.
so much of the soul, the lived experience is exchanged through those personal relationships. It makes you care. It makes
Hmm.
you give a shit about their
Yeah.
life. Just like going to a national park that you haven't been to. Oh, all because it's not my backyard doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And now that I've been to Yosemite or the Grand Canyon or to Great Smoky Mountains, whatever, now I give a shit about that place because I have a personal connection with it.
Love it. I think that's a really good place to wrap up like the recreating responsibly adventure travels part. But in our introduction, you mentioned foraging for mushrooms, and I'm a big fan of morels. And I didn't know morels were in the West. Like I've only really seen them in like the Midwest. So I'll go. Like I don't,
So,
I don't know much about foraging for mushrooms other than just walking out in the woods where I grew up, and we would go every year to pick up morels.
so this is something I'm excited about because I recently was introduced to foraging for ramps. Yeah, the wild
Cool.
onions. Yeah, whole hillside. It was a blast, and then yeah, kind of segued into mushrooms, and then yeah, I can't identify other than a morel and like a chicken of the woods.
Yeah,
I don't want to
that's good.
die.
That's good. Did you have a fruitful foray for ramps?
Oh yeah, the entire hillside was covered. It's crazy. But
Nice.
and then I even whenever I came back, that was the cool part was I had learned how to identify him and I found him in my yard.
There we go. Bingo. So okay, yeah. So you two might have heard the expression NIMBY, not in my backyard, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I had a great mentor to me. His name's Chris, and he was kind of like my manager when I first started into guiding. And he used the expression FIMBY, which is kind of the opposite. It's fuck. It's in my backyard. So the whole, as the story goes, it's like there's a guy who's reading about Joshua trees and visiting Joshua Tree National Park, and he never knew that those existed. And then all of a sudden, he looks out in his front yard, and like on the median is a Joshua tree, and it's like, oh my goodness, it's right here. So that's kind of that. In many ways, that's the really gratifying part about guiding, or just like getting people out in general, which I know you two know well, to going
Yeah.
on so many trips in groups, right? For me, the mushroom thing. If you know chicken of the woods or morels, you're like already ahead of the game. I didn't start foraging until 2017. I was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail in 2016. I met this guy at a Trail Angels house, and we were in the kitchen, and we were doing very hiker trash like things that aren't family friendly necessarily. And he he starts to tell me about wild mushrooms in the Chico area of California. Now, fast forward, I just like the Continental Divide with that guy, so we ended up becoming really good friends. But he is the one who first got me introduced to a lot of mushrooms. The first ones that I ever found was chicken in the woods. We were on the Tahoe Rim Trail. We found some. We sliced them off. I cooked them. I'd never eaten a wild mushroom before, so like many people, I was like, "Oh shit, what's gonna happen? Am I gonna trip balls? Am I gonna die? Like, is my liver gonna give out? Do I need to like call my mom? You know?" And so I cooked it, and I remember I had a jet boil, and I had this fin of chicken. Have you both had chicken before? Chicken in the woods?
Yes.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, so I had like a tiny little shelf, right? And I cut it off, and I didn't have any oil or anything. I didn't know about dry sautéing or anything, but I just like cooked this thing in my jet boil, which, as you know, a lot of backpacking stoves have two temperatures, like hot and ungodly hot, right?
Yeah.
So I was like trying to simmer it in like an inch of water. It was really shitty. It didn't work, but I ended up eating it. And I was like, okay, well, like, all right, guy, like, all right, Matt, my buddy, Clean Soup. I was like, okay, well, I'm taking this on faith, I'm sure I'll be okay. Well, the next day around noon, I was walking and I felt this terrible feeling in my stomach, and I had the bubble guts, and it was terrible. I had hit the facilla trees pretty hard that afternoon. I was peeing out my butt, as they say. It was really, really uncomfortable. so that was kind of my first experience. Later on, once I learned a little bit more about Laetoporus and how you have to like cook it more thoroughly to not get sick, that helped. I went on to foraging. I think the first ones I did like solo on my own. Oyster mushrooms, pretty obvious. A lot of people find those all across the continental United States. That's a fairly safe one. And then lion's mane mushroom, which I'm not sure if you have lion's mane in the Midwest. Do you?
I believe we do. I think I've seen it before, but that does that one have the one that kind of looks like it that could kill you? What's that called?
No, so that's the nice thing about lion's mane is it doesn't
okay.
have like a deadly lookalike or anything. Yeah,
Okay.
so I just started off. There's like 4 or 5 mushrooms. It's like chicken in the woods, lion's mane, morels, chanterelles. Some of those it's hard to find a lookalike that's deadly.
Okay.
A vast majority, I think it's a common misconception. People think, "Oh, if I eat the wrong mushroom, I'm gonna die on accident." Like, I mean, and that can totally happen. Like, there's certain mushrooms. They're called the death cap and the destroying angel for a reason, right? But there's a lot of mushrooms where you're just gonna have GI distress, and that's the worst of it for the most part. Or if you prepare it incorrectly, you could have GI distress. So anyway, I kind of started with that little mycelium network of just a handful, and just like mycelium, I slowly branched out to more adventurous mushrooms in different areas of the country. And that's a major thing of like living in the Northwest. I mean, you put up with shitty rain for 8 months out of the year, but I now live in fungi kingdom, so I'm really stoked about that. Yeah.
My dad went morel hunting, I want to say 2 weeks ago. I think he said he got 200 and he stopped.
Ooh, damn.
My parents were eating mushrooms like in everything for like a week.
Is he going to share some or what?
Well, they're gone now. I think they ate them all. I think they might have dehydrated some to save them. But yeah, that was like a big part of my childhood. Every spring, it's like, nope, we're going mushroom hunting. They're out, and we were lucky enough to have some land with forested areas, so we just go out every year.
That's awesome. You see, you're way hip to the game. You probably way more morel foraging than I do. That sounds great.
That's the only one, though. That's the only one I know. I know roughly how to do it and where to go. But
fair enough. Well, if either of you two are in Washington in the fall, we'll link up. We'll go out.
Well, Kyle, I think it's time for my fun questions. What do you think?
Yep.
All right. So number 1, I ask this of everybody: what is your biggest outdoor mistake?
Do you mean like a specific scenario, or you mean like an overarching, like thematic thing?
Dealer's choice, whatever you want.
I'll go with one of both. So more like overarching, I would say. One of the largest mistakes I've had in my outdoor career is just having an ego, just like thinking that on some level my value was at a certain space because of what I was physically capable of, right? Which isn't fair, and it's total baloney, right? And just once you learn that like no one cares how far you've hiked or how fast you've hiked or whatever, you're gonna be a lot happier. You're not trying to impress anyone, and you're not trying to. You can still try to impress yourself, but like you're gonna be less of an asshole. So that goes a long way, and I feel like that's a practice, right? Sometimes it's easy to fall back into that, whether it's hiking, professional, whatever your hobby or interest is. It's really, really sometimes it's hard to stay humble. So that's a practice. In terms of like an actual specific scenario, there's probably 2. A couple of years ago, I was hiking the Lewitt Trail, which circumnavigates Mount St. Helens. This is in 2019. I dropped my girlfriend off at the airport because she was flying on a business trip to Chicago, and it was really early. I dropped her off at like 4 a.m. and then I made the drive to St. Helens. And when I got there, I realized that I forgot my shoes.
Ooh.
But I drove so far that I was like, dude, I'm not driving home. So I hiked the whole thing in Chacos. And luckily, my feet were like totally good, and like the volcanic blast zone and stuff like didn't bother me. But that's one snafu. And then probably my worst one was this last June. I was hiking the Continental Divide, and I was in the South San Juans, southern section of Colorado. Which, for those listeners who don't know, they're huge mountains, obviously, but on the Continental Divide, looking at spring, there's still some snow on the trail, and it can make for some hazardous passes and mountain crossings. So there's one area where, looking at the guide that we were using and talking to other hikers, a lot of people had fallen down on. They'd had some nasty spills and scares, and my hiking partner, Clean Soup, and I, we figured, okay, well, we're going to bushwhack down the mountain to the valley below and then hike back up on the other side so that we can avoid sliding on the snow. And so in doing that, we got off trail, and it was a really, really steep grade. And we were kind of like one foot after the other, side face walking, whatever. And I get to a patch of snow, and I think that I see a glissade chute. And so I say, well, oh shit, here's a glissade chute. Somebody obviously went down this on their butt, and they seemed fine, like they made it to the bottom. Let me cut out a bunch of work bushwhacking through this thorny hillside, and I'll do this. So I kind of sat down on it. I didn't have an ice axe or traction devices or anything, just my trekking poles. And I kind of tested it out, and it was a little steep, but I figure, hey, why not? I feel like I have a reasonable amount of experience doing this. I'll give it a try. In any case, once I actually started going, my momentum picked up immediately, and I just had one of those moments where I thought, oh shit, like it's happening right now. My life flashed before my eyes. So I slid down this thing for probably like I want to say it was like 100 yards. It was probably like 100 feet in reality, but I was totally on my back like a turtle, just like an idiot. I tried to roll over as fast as I could and self-arrest my trekking poles, and it didn't work. So I was spinning out of control, just like totally freaking out. And eventually I was lucky enough to grab a thorny bush that was on the side of the trail, and I pulled myself off the snow. Yeah, but that was one of those moments. I only have like really, really tiny scars. It's not a big deal. But in that moment, I thought like, oh man, what a selfish prick. Like, why did I do that? That was so dumb. I could have just stayed still. Yeah, this is how it ends. Like, I gotta have a better story than this, But that was probably my biggest, number one, death defying snafu,
No, that's perfect. That's the type of thing that we like to hear. Because even people with a bunch of experience still make, in hindsight, really dumb mistakes. And we went over mine. One of the first ones, I almost died because I wanted to swim to some dumb island. Like, why did I do that? It was pointless in the end, but now it just makes a story where I almost died. But
yeah, you made it. Hey, we're here now.
I made it.
Cheers for that. You learned from it, right?
Yeah. For anybody, if you see an island out there, it's further than it looks.
Don't do it.
Yeah, just don't do it unless you actually know what you're doing and a strong swimmer. Yeah. But my other question, and you may not have an answer to this, maybe we did a great job of interviewing you, but is there a question that we should be asking you that we haven't?
Check the ego, Trev.
I know. Joe's been pumping me up. I'm all good.
No, you guys are crushing it. You're rocking it. I don't know about a question that I guess, we talked a lot about a variety of different topics, but maybe this might sound trite because I feel like you have so many hikers on the pod, but just like how to get involved in long distance hiking is a big one that a lot of folks ask, or like, how do I take that step to just like be confident and get outdoors? Those are more, nebulous, like kind of vague questions, but I feel like I've spent a lot of time hiking, you know what I mean? That is kind of my bread and butter. And the long and short of it is get out there and ask questions. Go to your local REI, go to your local outfitter, try to make a connection with a mentor. It's nice to be proud, of what you're capable of and what you know. But once you meet someone who actually knows, it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect. You can be like totally cocky and confident when you don't know anything, even though you think you know. Go find an actual expert and go to school and be humble. Be willing to learn.
Oh, that's great. I think that's going to bring us into onto the end. But Joe, is there anything you want to plug? Like, I threw some stuff in the outline, but your stuff, any of your friends or anything that you want to plug?
Yeah. I would say, I mean, if you're interested, I feel like I'm just a drop in the ocean, right? There's a million people just like me doing things that I do. But if you're interested in following my specific journey, or if you've enjoyed listening to my perspective, you're more than welcome to follow me on social media. I'm fairly active on Instagram. My handle is at Mr. Overhill. That's Mr. period Overhill. So that's at Mr. Overhill. Alternatively, if you're interested in reading some of my blog, want to learn a little bit more about my background, if you're interested in seeing what I've written for the Trek, which is a through hiking publication, you can totally find me on the trek.com. You can also check out my website, which is mroverhill.com. That's Mr. no period Overhill.com. Check me out there. I have a whole bunch of through hiking friends and guiding friends and stuff like that. Too many to mention, but if you're on my social feeds, you'll probably see them mentioned at one place or another, and they're great follows as well.
Cool. Awesome. So yeah, I'll go through all of my normal stuff at the end. So yeah, the best way to support the podcast is rate us 5 stars, no other stars, just 5 on any of the podcast rating things. And if you write a review that is 5 stars, I will read it on here as long as it isn't completely vulgar and saying things about my mother or something like that. My personal Instagram is at Trevor Bowman, 2 L's, 2 N's. Kyle has no social media presence whatsoever still. So yeah, just keep waving at people that look like they could be Kyle. So he lives in Central PA, but Kyle travels a lot. So just wave at anybody that looks like they're a Kyle. You can email the podcast at adventuringformeremortals@gmail.com. The Instagram for the podcast is at meremortalpod. We also have a Discord server. If that's your thing, the join link will be in the show notes. So with that, yeah, Joe, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a great talk. Really enjoyed this.
Super happy to be here, guys. I really appreciate you having me. It's been a privilege. Thanks.
We'll see you all next month.
Bye.
Bye.